Hey everybody, and welcome back to another video from Barley Studios. In this project video, which I've been meaning to do forever, finally got caught up on my orders and have enough time to get this project knocked out. This is my rendition of an Alien Egg Tumbler. Now this thing is crazy detailed and has a lot of layers that go into it. Not only just the sculpt work, but we'll also have a lot of layers and washes on the paint side, which will be a separate video, so tune in for that in the next few weeks. I'm starting this alien egg off with a rimmed lip around the top. I just did this one layer at a time, so I didn't plan any of this out. You know, everybody is familiar with the Alien movies, the franchise, but I didn't want to really lock myself into any of those concepts. I just wanted to go with the flow, and if I want to add something later in a different version of this, I will. If I want to change something up as I go along, then I'll do that as well. So every segment of this video is completely just random. I'm just adding it as I feel like doing it as I move along through the video. So after adding that main lip around the top, I'm going to add a secondary lip here. And this is just going to show kind of a ripple effect. It's going to give it some definition, and it's just going to kind of give that upper lip a little bit of just dimensional support. And I'm going to add a little bit of creases here and there as I work through this video. Alright, so with that second lip done, I'm going to go ahead and add some just circular smooth nodes that work their way around the tumbler. I don't want it all to be just lips and ripples and wrinkles, so I'm going to work these around the tumbler, and then I want them to have varying heights from the bottom of the tumbler just to create some more variation. I don't want it to be so uniform. So just because I could, I decided to bring a little bit of prehistoricness to this Alien Egg Tumbler rendition here. So I brought a sharp, jagged claw or tooth shape down off that upper lip, and I'm going to kind of blend that in at first, and then I'll actually carve away some of the clay so that it looks like that ivory or that sharp tooth is coming out of the flesh of that upper lip. And then I'll detail paint that in an ivory color, which will just give the overall darkness of an egg a little bit of light color for it just to kind of pop against. That way I can bring in different layers of color when I paint the thing. Alright, so the next step is for me to go ahead and frame in those smooth nodes there with a thin layer of clay. I'm going to do this around the bottoms and then along the tops as well, just to frame them in, just to give it some variation before I move into the lower portion of the tumbler. So I'm just going to work in small segments all the way around the cup, a little bit at a time. And then when I roll out that clay and it goes a little too high, I'll just cut that with my X-Acto knife, and then I'll blend it into the next segment when I get to adding that next portion until it goes all the way around the cup. There's kind of like a side view of how the halfway point is. And then here you can see that variation in height from the bottom of the cup. That way, it's, like I said, it's not so uniform, it adds some variation. And then that way I feel like it brings a little bit more realism to the cup, because it's supposed to be a fleshy, soft egg. It's not supposed to be a piece of metal, you know. Alright, so with that framing in on the bottom part of those nodes done, I'm going to go ahead and add some clay around the top as well. So these go at different angles, and it's kind of just going to go in a swooping motion from that secondary lip at the top of the cup down and around the edges of those nodes. And it just gives it, some textures, some variation. They're all going to be a little bit of different sizes and shapes. And it just makes it kind of like frame that in, so that way it's just not all wrinkles. They're actually projected out from the egg a little bit. And I want these to look somewhat like hard, maybe ridges, maybe some cartilage or something like that, or maybe like an exoskeleton on the upper portion of the egg that could be giving it strength or something. And then once I get these all blended around the cup, I'm also going to add a small piece of clay above the nodes, which will almost make them look like an eyelid. So that way, if you were walking up on this cup in a forest or something and you were like, well, hey, look, there's a bunch of eyes there. And then as I go through this process, it gets more and more crazy. So here's a finished look of how that framing in goes. I missed a few there. I'll come back and add those clay pieces later. No worries there. And then there you can see the texture I'm kind of laying in. Alright, so I could not wait to get the lips on the top portion of the tumbler here. Now these are projected out, so I blend them on the bottom and then I roll the clay segments over, and then I will use an X-Acto knife to cut the lips into the overall wrinkled shape that I want. And I'm using a dimpling tool in different sizes here to create just a dimpled skin effect. And when I come in with a wash during the painting process, all of those washes will settle into those little grooves, and then if I do decide to do a dry brush, it's really going to bring it all to life. And I want these to have a pinkish to a red flesh tone, so that the top will really pop against the dark grays or greens, and maybe a little bit of orange ochre that I add to the bottom of the cup. So I'm going to work my way around. There's 3 lips here, and I'm going to leave the edges of the lips kind of smooth, add a little bit of striations in them, and I'm going to dimple it in a way that the lips look like they're bent and folded over. So the egg had been opened up from the top, just like in the Alien franchise movies. But I'm putting my own spin on it, so this is an absolute blast. I could have added the lips later. It did make it more difficult to hold the cup. But I could not wait to add those details, and that really brings the top of the cup to life. Here I am blending the bottom of that clay. I feel like if I had just attached to the top, and when I fold it over, once it bakes, it would be weaker than it should be. So I did go ahead and blend it at least a little bit on the other side of the cup. And then when I fold that over, I want to pinch it a little bit while keeping it attached to the metal of the cup, so that it doesn't have a lot of air gap there, because I want the epoxy to get in that groove, and I don't want to have to paint underneath there. So if I do shade it, it's just going to be kind of a dark tone of what the surrounding colors are, because I won't be able to get a brush in there really deep. So I want to make that fold over pretty tight when I get done with it, and then just add some wrinkles and some variation so that not all of them look the same, and then move on to the next segment here. Alright, so here's the 3 rolled over lips completely finished, and I've started to add striations where it smooths out to where it goes to the kind of like a fang right there below the dip of the lip. So I'm just going to use a dimpling tool to apply some details and striations just to give it some variation, so that way the striations go with the overall flow of the clay. And I don't want anything to overly pull the eye when I get a wash put on it, but I do want it to have some textured effect. And a dimpling tool achieves that really quickly without having to cut into the clay very much. Alright, so of course I do come back later and add a little bit more striations on the clay where I had smoothed it out by handling it. So I do redo some of this process again later, but that just kind of gives you an idea of what it would look like with those striations in the clay. Alright, so I don't know how many people out there are kind of triggered by trypophobia, you know, the extreme or irrational aversion to a fear of clusters or small holes and bumps. Kind of just gives you the willies. Ugh. Yeah, sometimes I look at those things and it's just like, ugh, gives you a little sick stomach feeling. So I decided to add that to these smooth nodes here. You know, a lot of people say that trypophobia is the way of the body saying, hey, look, that's dangerous. You know, that's a dangerous plant or that's a dangerous mushroom. Don't touch that. So I kind of wanted to add that in. It just adds a little bit of a creepiness to it. And when I come in and shade these and maybe make a little itty bitty drips of yellow ochre coming out of these or other portions of the tumbler, it really adds a little grossness to it, because it is supposed to be an alien egg, and I want to portray that ickiness and the simulation of it being wet and oozy. So I'll kind of come back to that later when I go in to paint those. And I did that all the way around the tumbler. So next step is for me to begin working on the bottom. I do layer the entire thing in a thin layer of clay, and I add ribs that go the length of the tumbler all the way down. Not all the way down to the very bottom, but I know that this will keep it from fitting in a lot of cup holders, but let's be honest, this is not one of those cups that you take with you everywhere you go. This is one of those rare items that you use once in a while, or you keep it on a geek shelf. And let's be honest, a lot of us do have that geek shelf that needs an awesome alien egg, so you might be that person. So I'm going to shave some of that off because I put too much material there, and then I'm going to smooth that out again. And I'm going to work my way around the tumbler. These ribs are going to line up with the upward ridges of that upper piece of clay that frames in those smooth or were smooth nodes. So I'm going to work this all the way around the tumbler, and then we'll catch back. Alright, so here's the final, look of the bottom of the tumbler with those ribs put in. So some of those striations that I added in early will get rubbed out as I work with the tumbler, and handle it. So I'll put those back in later. And now I'm going to go ahead and add in a secondary row of nodes. I didn't know where I was going with this when I added this in, but it ended up being a cool effect. So I'm just going to add small nodes in, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop a hole in the very middle of each one. Each one will vary in size slightly in shape, so they're not uniform. And the striations on the background will go around the node. And then what I'll do is when I pop the hole in the middle, I will create a barnacle effect, and I will apply very heavy strokes downward from the bottom of the barnacle so that it looks like it's a vent or a release hole, maybe like a vent, to release pressure inside the tumbler. That way it's not going over the Trypophobia holes on the top, but it just adds a different layer to it, and it's going to be a little bit of an ickiness as the ooze comes out of those things. So that's the effect I want. Gross. Alright, so you can see I'm really not being gentle with that clay. I'm really applying a lot of pressure to get some digs into the bottom of those barnacles. And this is what they look like when they're all completed out. So when I bake this, I'll hit that with a little bit of a wire brush just to get out any of that clay that's loose before I begin painting. Next, the very fun part is creating some armatures for some legs. Yes, I know that this very first armature that I made was too long. I accept this. So I do come back later and I trim that down quite a bit. So what I'm going to do is I want to create some alien legs that come out of the top of the tumbler. If you were able to see my ghost canister tumbler that I created with the ghost breaking free, it was a very similar process. I did not do armatures for those, and I'm going to start that way I can dig and place those in there and paint them separately, and then what I'll do is I'll glue them in place before epoxying with a nice clear epoxy to hold them in place even more. So I'm going to apply 2 digits here on each finger, and I only went with 4 of these, but I wanted to create kind of a crab effect or a scorpion look to it. I also come in here a minute and I design a scorpion-ish tail, which I did not wrap around the entire tumbler. I just didn't feel like going all the way around. That way, if you were to drink from it, it gives you something to hold on to without you having to hold something that's super 3D towards the bottom of the cup. But I'll get to that in a moment. For now, as you can see, I'm creating an itty-bitty claw on the very end. And then I'm going to apply some striations to it and indent it where the second joint meets the top one, which is a larger joint. And then I will shade that with black paint when I get to the painting portion of it. So I want to make it look like it's inset into those, just like a crab would be. Some tarantulas have that as well, if I recall. So it's kind of just going to give a freaky, weird effect. I didn't really know where I was going with this, but it turned out absolutely awesome, and I'm so glad that I did it this way. This will probably evolve over time. As I get more and more confident with the process of making armatures and little legs and things, I probably will continue to add more and more details to them, like little ridges, little scales, spikes, and things like that. So I look forward to creating more intricate arms and legs for creatures as I learn to craft with clays. And that's the whole goal, is to push yourself beyond what you've done before, and I'm trying my best to do that. So I'm just applying a little bit of striations to that, and then that will be dry fit into there. And I want to gap those holes out a little bit, gape them out so that I can easily put them on and off after I bake both portions, because the fingers get baked separately, and then I'll add those after the fact. So I want to make sure that the armature inside the finger is bent to the right proportions, so that the little claw at the end of the arm is making contact with the outside of the egg, so that when I epoxy it, it gives an extra foothold for that extension of clay to hold on to. Because if you do drop this, because it is such a detailed piece of work, it could likely break. So I just want to add a little bit of more strength to that by attaching that bottom claw to the edge of the tumbler in some way. So here I am making the second one. I made it off camera and I'm form fitting it on camera so y'all can see that. It's a very cool effect. And it really does have a crab effect to it, and I kind of like it, the way that it is, just like that. So you'll see I won't do a whole lot of changes to these 4 arms. I will add some striations to them, and then when I shade them with washes and paints, they're absolutely gorgeous. Alright, so here's a side shot of all 4 legs completely baked on the sheet. When I did this, I made a mistake of not putting them in the correct order, so I spent about 2 or 3 minutes having to form fit them one at a time to decide which ones went where with each other. Moving forward, I was able to put them in the correct order every single time. So after baking them, I did dry fit them again, and this is more so not just so that I know where they go and how they fit, but I want to apply gentle pressure so that it pushes the underlying lip of clay down to where the bottoms of the claws make contact with the side of the egg, so that way I can give it a stronger hold on the tumbler itself, and they're not so weak projecting out away from the art object. So once I get an idea of where they are, I am going to go ahead and move on to cutting the porthole in the bottom of the egg, where it looks like the tail is breaking free of the bottom of the egg. Alright, so here's the legs at the top of the cup. Absolutely awesome and freaky looking. So you may be asking yourself, well, Mr. Byerly, why didn't you add 2 more legs to the third lip at the other side? I didn't want to overly clutter the top of the cup. I just didn't feel like that an additional 2 legs were truly necessary. I want the the imagination can say that the legs are still inside the tumbler and they haven't really broke free the top, or they haven't poked out the edge. And I want it to look like the alien is coming out of just one side and not just all around upward. Here I made a mistake, a big mistake, and I had to correct it. So I cut away part of the ribs where I want the tail to come out, and then I tried to lay in clay where I imagined that it would be, and I was gonna kind of sculpt it in place. This wasn't logical, and I really didn't think about it before I did it. It would not happen this way. If a tail were to pop out of the bottom and it were kind of wrap around the cup, if I went all the way around and I constricted it, I could build up the clay where it meets the tail, and then it would make it look like it's squeezing the bottom of the cup. I could easily do that, but that's not what I wanted to do with this cup. And I may do that later on with like a boa constrictor sculpted cup. That's a great idea. Future ideas. So what I did is I built up the ridges again, or the ribs, and I built up the edges of the egg where it would be thick as it broke free. Now this will have an epoxy ooze to it, so I'm applying striations to the outside ribs as I just feel like it, just out of the blue, just random. There's no uniformness to them at all. I'm just putting them wherever I feel like it can be. I'm putting it, and then when I bake this here in a moment, it is set in stone. So this thing is going to be completely sculpted, and then I will sculpt the tail here in a minute, which is just a really simple tail. It's going to be just like a kind of like a jointed scorpion tail with a stinger on the end. And I'm going to go ahead and wrap some really thin clay around the very bottom of the cup, just so that it brings it all together. I don't want to leave the bottom of the cup just open and just flat. That just doesn't sit well with me. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap a little layer around the edges. Just like I have done my vampire cup that I did, where I did the vampire head. So if you haven't checked that out, please do so. That one is a fully sculpted tumbler as well. Quite a long video, just like this one, but I'm trying to shorten these out so that they're not so long to where you can't watch them easily all the way through within about 30 or 40 minutes. Try my best, guys. Trying my best. So I don't want a lot to be on the bottom of the cup. I don't want to do any kind of egg cracking or breaking or anything like that, where I have to add a lot of ooze or texture to the bottom. I may do a little bit of an ochre drip from the breakaway portion of the tail, but really what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a clay saw blade, and I'm just going to apply downward pressure so that any of those high ridges from pushing down in the clay will just get a little bit of a sharp dimpled scratched effect. So I'm just extending those striations from the sides around to the edges. This isn't that big of a deal, but if you were to pick it up and look at the bottom, because you paid so much money for it, then you wouldn't want it to be incomplete. So I'm applying some dimples here with different tools. The saw blade was the way to go. Alright, so here I am using a wire tool just to apply some itsy bitsy random micro scratches along the exterior of the sides and the bottom. And this is completely random. I just did this wherever I felt like doing it, just to apply a place for all of that wash to settle into and give it some different shading and color. And I pushed down on the tumbler to make sure that it was level on the bottom. And then here we are. So there it is. There's the dimpled lips. There's the legs coming out and making contact with the exterior of the egg. Here is another view of those legs. See the contact. Then I have my Trypophobia Holes, kind of creepy looking. And I have my Barnacles, which are actually the first time I've done these. I'm going to have to do these more often, maybe on like a shipwreck cup or something. And then I have my relief hole where the tail's breaking free at the bottom. There's my scorpion tail. It is very rudimentary and very basic, but when I shade it, it should bring it to life a little bit. And I may add a little bit of ooze where the ooze is coming out of the barnacles and kind of dripping on that. But now you can see it sits on top of the ribs like it's supposed to, and it's not indented where it wouldn't be. This is how it would be if it was really coming out of the side. It wouldn't be inset in the egg like that. So now it's sitting on top, so you see the gaps between the ribs and the base of the egg. So that's just the way it's supposed to look. And I wanted that realism, even if it's just something minor. It would bug me if I didn't do that. Alright everybody, what an awesome build. This is my rendition of an Alien Egg Tumbler. It's going to really come to life when I apply some of the acrylic washes and dry brushing to it, so I'm so excited about that. I want to use a variety of colors, but I want to keep it dark except for the lips at the top. So stay tuned for that video to come out in the next few weeks. Please like and subscribe. It really incentivizes me to do more long format videos like this. This video runs about 27 minutes long from beginning to end with a lot of fast forwarding. So this took me hours upon hours to complete, and it will take me even longer to get this thing painted the way that I want to, with all the shading and the shadows and the color variations that I want to put into it. This will be on my Etsy shop when it becomes live, so do stay tuned to that at Barley Studios on Etsy. If you haven't favorited our shop, please do so, because there will be some bigger, badder cups coming out later, or you can check out our existing cups out there. I appreciate everybody watching. I'm trying to keep these videos a little bit shorter so that they're easier to watch on lunch breaks or just in the afternoons. I think that an hour or 2 hours for a crafting video is just too long. So if I can keep it under 30 minutes, I'll do so. Thanks everybody again. Please check out our other social medias. TikTok is something I'm really trying to push into to go live, so check it out. Later.